The thesis has never changed in that 4-year journey. Our objective was to enable EV adoption for India. We could really see that there's a massive opportunity in that transition that the country is going through, right? We realized that the majority of vehicles in India were either two-wheelers or three-wheelers, and they were probably the first ones which would go electric, right?
Hi everyone, welcome to the Orios Founder Series. Today I'm super privileged to be talking to Pulkit. Orios invested in Pulkit 4 years ago when they were working out of a small shop retrofitting batteries. Today Battery Smart is the largest battery network in India. They have 800 swap stations, they do 80,000 swaps a day, and they have prevented 100,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide from going into the atmosphere. All of this in a short period of 4 years. So Pulkit, I think, would love to hear, so your model has several stakeholders, and would just love to hear how it all comes together with the e-rickshaw driver, with the swap station. So why don't we get started with that?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for doing this with me. And obviously we have had the privilege of partnering with Orios early on in the journey. It was just me and Siddharth when we got a commitment and more of an idea rather than a business at that point of time. The thesis has never changed in that 4-year journey. Our objective was to enable EV adoption for India. We could really see that there's a massive opportunity in that transition that the country is going through, right? We realized that the majority of vehicles in India were either two-wheelers or three-wheelers, and they were probably the first ones which would go electric, right? And there were certain challenges in them being electric immediately. One was the vehicles were more expensive. There's a recurring capex problem because 50% of the cost is a battery cost, and you have to replace them every few years. Then the charging downtime was really a deterrent for any commercial EV driver, because that means loss of income if you're a gig worker or you're a passenger hailing service, right? To solve that, we realized battery swapping is the way to go. Batteries are provided by the network, so it reduces the upfront cost, and you don't need to charge them. It's a quick 2-minute swap, just like going to a petrol pump. You exchange your discharge battery with a charge when you're back on the road all day, right? Now, to do this, we wanted to do it in an asset-light manner, in a capital-efficient manner, and that is why we had to partner with all these stakeholders that you mentioned, right? So we have individual drivers who own a vehicle but not the battery swap with us. They are essentially our customers. We have fleet operators who also own vehicles but minus the battery swap with us. They can in turn lease those vehicles to individual drivers. We have partner stations. These are small mom and pop stores. We leverage their real estate, electricity, manpower to run these operations. And they in totality comprise of our network, right? So the stations serve all the operations. Customers can go to those stations and swap. And this has also been the differentiator between us and other swapping attempts to a certain extent. Another difference has been, and the other stakeholder in this ecosystem are the battery manufacturers, and we work almost with all of them who are large in India. We do not manufacture anything ourselves, so we work closely with them in designing these batteries, getting them manufactured to the right standards that we need, right specs that we need, and then buy them and deploy them on the network.
So there's some very interesting nuggets, right? So the cost of the battery, from what I understand, is 80% of the 50% of the vehicle. So if you remove the cost of the battery, how much does an average e-rickshaw cost?
So typically, for example, let's say two-wheelers, because people are more familiar with them. A low-speed, mid-speed scooter costs anywhere between 80,000 to 1,20,000 right now, right? And 50% is battery, right? So you can buy it as low as 40 or 50,000 rupees for a good scooter. Similarly, for an e-rickshaw, it's 1.8 lakh rupees with battery, and almost 95,000 without battery. It becomes much more affordable, and especially the consumer that we are serving, gig workers or e-rickshaw drivers, affordability is a real challenge, right? So in that way, we think that we are enabling or fast tracking that EV adoption, accelerating that for India.
Do you have data around how many people have adopted, how many vehicles are there in your network?
We have 38,000 customers right now, and we add close to 5,000 every month. And this is a mix of two-wheelers and three-wheelers. We started doing only three-wheelers for the first 2 years, and then the network started attracting a lot of first-time two-wheeler buyers. So now we serve close to 6,000 odd two-wheelers and another 32,000 three-wheelers. Right?
One more, so amongst several impacts, one is of course adoption of EVs and the environmental impact it has. but it's also on the income levels of your end customers, right? So be it the swap stations, who I believe the average income of a swap station is 25,000 rupees, right? And then of course it's the cost saving for the the drivers who belong to the lower segment of the society. All very interesting. And can you talk a little bit about the technology? How you leverage technology and how you leverage technology to scale and come to this level.
Sure. So I think any swapping network is at an intersection of infrastructure when it comes to stations, and then the hardware or the battery, which is your key offering that you're putting on the network. So there's a hardware tech in terms of what kind of batteries are these, what kind of BMS, which is a device that controls the performance of battery, what kind of BMS are you using, what kind of IoT devices are you using to capture data from those batteries. And then there is a software layer in terms of how are you leveraging all that data for operations, right? In terms of front end applications, obviously we have mobile apps for customers, for partners, even for our ground teams and so on. But the core technology that we use for our operations and why we have been able to scale fast at a right utilization level is you have to solve for three problems, right? And very close to, let's say, what a Uber or Ola would have to solve. You cannot expect your customers to go tens of kilometers to access a battery, so you have to minimize that. Once a customer goes there, you cannot expect them to wait because that's your key offering, so you have to minimize the wait time. At the same time, every charged battery should find a customer because you have to optimize that utilization, right? So entirety of data science or how we leverage tech goes into solving this problem, right? And this is counterproductive. If you optimize for one, the other would go down, right? So you have to balance that out. So what we do is we are able to predict which user will swap when and where, and we are able to predict which battery will get swapped with whom, right? And at the same time predict health of battery, life of battery, predict if a battery has to go under maintenance for any reason. So all of that is done because every battery is a smart device and it has an IoT device, SIM card and so on, and we are getting real-time data for all the batteries that are deployed on that.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Would love to get advice, because you guys have scaled at a phenomenal level in the last 4 years, right? By sort of any standards. I'd love to sort of ask you some general questions which the other founders in the ecosystem can benefit from. So tell me, one sort of common advice that is typically given to founders is that do things that don't scale. So when Battery Smart started out, you had a company operated station, right? Company operated, company owned station. How do you, in hindsight, how do you think about that decision? Do you think it was the right decision? Should you have done that for longer? What are your thoughts about that, and how can other founders sort of leverage, that sort of advice?
Sure. So I think in terms of scale up that has happened in last 4 years, there has been a lot of decisions that have helped us do that, but at the same time it is also a function of a very large market and a very strong customer offering, right? If you were not operating in such a large market or our value proposition was not as strong, it would not have been possible to scale that fast. That being said, we are barely serving 1% of EVs right now, so it's still a very, very long way to go. In terms of the company operated station and thought process behind that, right? I think in terms of what is the amount of capital and resources you have available at any point of time also governs your decisions at that point, right? When we were starting, this was a new category, still unproven even for us, right? So it was very important that we demonstrate that how a station would run. We learn what would be the challenges to run it, and we stay closer to the users that we were onboarding, because this was the period where we had to iterate a lot on product, on offerings, understand the pain points of customer, what is the pricing propensity in terms of they can afford to pay for this service and so on, right? So we actually, that office or that shop, which was very like a 300 square feet shop, we actually used that as our office also for the first year. So we operated out of there only. We served 100 odd customers. And for the entire year, what that meant was the first 40,000-50,000 swaps were done by us, right? And we were a close 6-member team, so doing everything. But that really gave us a lot of insight in terms of what our customers are like, what are they willing to pay, what are the pain points that really affect them, and all of that helped us in the later part of the journey when we started ramping this up and replicating it in the other territories. And this was West Delhi, Janakpuri, which is where we also piloted franchisee stations in the same time frame, right? And those learnings we could really pick up April 21 onwards after the second lockdown of COVID, and just really replicated it across Delhi. Within a year, we were growing at like 50 to 70% month on month. And even now we continue growing like 20% month on month. Last year we have clocked like a 7x growth. But I think that 1 year of learning was very important, and staying closer to action, right?
Yeah. Tell me, given that it was such a new model, what were the challenges you faced when you were raising your first check?
So I think first round was actually the easier one compared to most of the following rounds, and that was because in Orios we found an early believer, right? It was just me and Siddharth with a conviction that this could really work for the EV space in India, and Orios believed in us, and they betted just on founders, is how I would put it. With that small conviction shown by it, or a validation shown by a reputed VC, we also got the confidence to kind of do it, and we put in our own money, started the first station, and by that time we could close that first round. And interestingly, immediately a few months after that, COVID happened, right? And we could not start operations in that period. As soon as the lockdown was lifted, June 20 is when we started our operations. Price backed us to the hill time, right? For the first 1 year, we worked very closely in making all the changes to the model and how we are going to scale it. Post that, I think it was almost a year and a half into operations when Bloom came and invested in us, and then it was Tiger. Then recently we also got BII and EIF as our new investors.
What is the total amount you fundraised to date?
We've raised north of 60 million in equity so far, and debt is separate.
Yeah. So we'll come to debt as well. So speaking about fundraising, and since you've raised a significant amount, especially given the life of your company, how do you think about, and how should other founders think about fundraising given the cycles? Right now we're undergoing sort of a big bear cycle, right? Is it possible to time that? Did you actively think about timing that?
So I don't think it's possible to time that, especially because the life cycle of a lot of startups are much smaller than the life cycles that market could show, right? And you never know it. No one can really predict those life cycles. I think it is both good and bad for the industry. Good in the sense that it makes everyone go back to fundamentals, making your businesses sustainable, profitable as early as you can. Bad that there's certain sectors, certain startups at a stage where you need that capital to kind of even reach PMF, right? Luckily, at least what I see, and you would know better, that the seed investments are still happening at a rapid pace and no slowdown there, which is very important for innovation to happen, right? Late stage, I think it is back to fundamentals. Businesses that are doing well, which are sustainable, do not have a constant need for cash, will continue raising.
That's right. And speaking of that, you guys have also turned EBITDA positive. Was that always the plan to turn EBITDA positive so soon, or do you think that happened because the overall sentiment of the market changed?
So I think despite the changes, this is the year where we have raised more than 50% of the total capital that we have raised. So we recently closed a 33 million round a few months back. But from day one, we have been extremely conscious around how we use the resources that we have. I think this also happened because we started with a very small check, right? So we started with our own money, 20 lakh rupees put into the business, right? So you want to make every buck go the longest mile it can, right? And then we raised a 300k round, right? We used that for the entire year to reach a PMF stage. So because we have built that business in those constraints, I think it is part of DNA of our company. Interestingly, we have not used even 20% of the capital we have raised so far over the last 3 years, right? So I think it is irrespective of how much capital we have raised.
So how does the fundraising change depending on the stage of the raise? Any advice for founders on that? So say when you're raising your series A versus B versus C, what do you do differently?
I think in today's world, these nomenclatures are not holding any meaning in terms of check size or the matrices, right? But I'll just share what happened and transpired with us. Our first raise was more about proving the space, whether EVs will happen in India, whether swapping is that solution. Our second round was more after PMF, where consumers were sticking around, paying, and the model could be scaled. And what you had to prove was that swapping is scalable, right? And you can really replicate this. A third round where Tiger came in was more around proving that scale, that last 6 months we've grown 10x, right? We can continue doing that. Our recent and future rounds would be more around profitability, whether what you are scaling, does that really make money or not, right? I think those are more the milestones that every company has to go through. You're proving out your sector, a PMF, scalability and profitability, right? Post profitability, I think all rounds are similar. It's more about what kind of IRRs can you create for shareholders, whether this is something which could be public market asset at some point of time, what kind of terminal value would it carry. So I think that changes. I don't have specific advice, but I think it is very important for all founders, and something we have also tried to do as best as we can, is that with each stage of the company you have to kind of unlearn a lot of things and reinvent yourself, and you have to adopt to a very different set of investors that you will be talking to, right? Which means the questions are different, the expectations are different, the return expectations and risk profiles are different, right? Someone who is doing an early stage has a very different risk profile compared to a private equity investor or someone doing a pre-IPO round.
How should founders today think about the growth versus profitability problem?
I think the fundamental of business is profitability. I think businesses are meant to be profitable. There are circumstances where growth can benefit you to maybe corner a market. If you're in a market where it's winner takes all, it makes sense to kind of focus on growth in certain periods and then focus on profitability. But at least there should be a path to profitability for every business to be called a business. That's our belief.
So another question I have for you is around your moat, right? You guys have built a very solid moat, and like you mentioned initially in the interview, that apart from more vertically integrated players who are battery manufacturers, nobody's actually come even close to the scale of Battery Smart. Why do you think that is?
So interestingly, this business is at an intersection of three capabilities is how we look at it, right? So there is an infra play, which is extremely capital intensive. The number of batteries you have to deploy, the stations that you have to deploy, right? Which means that larger groups or conglomerates who have lower costs of capital, who have done a lot of debt, know how to do a lot of debt, can do this, because you are essentially taking away 50% asset cost upon yourself from the consumers, right? So one is that, which is typically not what a lot of startups do. Then there is a technology play, because even if you do the first part right, you will never make money unless you are utilizing each asset to the maximum level possible, and that determines your payback periods, what kind of money you will make, right? Now the intersection of infra and tech is already very rare, and then this is a very new sector, right? So you have to be extremely agile in terms of innovating, in terms of moving from one product to another, whatever is the best for the sector that you're doing, which meant that ideally manufacturers who would always be slower to react to those product changes would find it difficult. You're married to a supply chain and a production line, but someone who is more horizontal, working with every other manufacturer, can do it faster and easier, right? So I think those three things and balanced out create a very defensible position. Also from a consumer lens, this is very much like telecom, right? You're a subscriber to a network, you're happy with the pricing and service. Probably once in a lifetime you might decide to switch, but otherwise, switch costs are high, but at the same time the MRP is almost 20 times, right? So our customers typically pay us 5,000 rupees a month, right? Which is not the case for telecom.
Do you think that also, you've made like some technological advances as well, right? As far as interoperability of batteries is concerned, especially in the entry point commercial vehicles. Do you think that is also a hindrance for just other players to kind of enter, because it'll take some time to sort of catch up with that?
Yeah. So I think we don't want that to be like a trade secret, right? In fact, we don't put any patents on the batteries that we use. In fact, we would want that to become the de facto standard, right? We have deployed more than 100,000 batteries today. We are the largest owners of batteries in India right now, right? ideally we want everyone to start adopting to those. We are already putting in a lot of effort on what works best, what is most interoperable. So when there is a lack of standard, your distribution governs what the standard is, right? And that has been our principle from day one. And we work with so many manufacturers, and now that we are almost 80 to 90% of their supply, it also becomes something that they are more willing to push to OEMs, even where someone is purchasing a battery, right? So at some level we have been able to do that, but obviously long way to go. But at the same time, we don't want to control why we are interoperable. It's completely open access is how I'd put it.
Got it. Now I have another question. We touched upon this a little bit earlier around debt. So how should you've also raised a significant amount of debt, but that's also because of the specific nature of your business. But how should founders think about debt versus equity, and at what stage should they start thinking about debt? Any advice around that?
Sure. So I think debt is something that is not easily available to a lot of startups at the right terms or the right cost. We have raised north of 45 million in debt, and another 100 million sanctioned, yet to be drawn down. But we have been lucky to kind of crack that so early on is what I believe. It is part of business in terms of you need debt for all those assets, and that is a better way to fund those assets than equity and cheaper. So for us it becomes very important. It might not be relevant for a lot of companies who do not own any assets or are asset light, but at the same time, wherever a business has cash flows to service that debt very confidently, I think debt is always cheaper than equity, right? And it's something you can pay back easily.
Another question I have, Pulkit, is around team. Right now, you guys, as you've scaled up, that's obviously one of the biggest challenges that founders face. Can you give some advice, and that also across sort of different stages of business, right? How did you think about team, say, from X to 10X, and now how are you thinking about team from like at the stage that you're in, which is 10X to 100X?
Sure. I think it doesn't change by stage. Everyone does it differently. What we have tried to do is build this org in a very meritocratic fashion, right? What that means is we have never biased ourselves on, say, your education, your experience, and more on outputs that you do here, and look at those ingredients which work in people who deliver that kind of output, right? Which is, say, if someone is coming from a humble background, how much hunger do they have in terms of proving themselves, right? Things like that. We have always biased ourselves on those traits when we are hiring people. And that being said, I think you can never be perfect around hiring. There will always be a 10 to 20% pool which does not come out to be how you expected them, right? So you have to keep iterating, but it's very important to create that culture where someone who is delivering is moving up, getting more responsibilities, and someone who is not is either doing the same thing or not with you, right? And this is more for the majority of people, but at the leadership level, I think we have been very lucky. There have been people who have been with us since the beginning and continue to scale up and grow tremendously in terms of what they deliver and how they manage their teams. So now it's more like we have good 16 people who had different functions and responsibilities, and they have been able to do a really good job in terms of kind of building their own teams. But all of that is stitched together with a common culture.
Got it. So what you're saying is that you have certain ingredients that you look for, which is hunger and people who sort of want to prove themselves. For your leadership team, while you said that a lot of people have ended up staying, what is your view on sort of at this stage, since hiring from, say, startups versus larger organizations? I think a lot of companies at your stage grapple with that question.
I think we have been more biased towards startups compared to larger organizations.
Why is that?
That means that we do have a mix, but I would say probably 20-30% max from larger companies and 70 from small. I think it's very function specific, right? So for example, functions like finance, right? So we hired someone from Big Four and everything. You have specific knowledge in certain functions, right? Even for our procurement or supply chain function, we hired someone who is from that background, because you have to bring that specific knowledge. right? In terms of knowing what those quality control processes are when you're procuring, what are the parameters you have to look at, right? So wherever you need specific knowledge, it is better to hire from industries which exist for a long time, because that knowledge has trickled down and been kind of converted into playbooks, right, already. Right, but at the same time, there are functions where you need innovative thinking, right? You need people to think grounds up, think 0 to 1, think first principles, and kind of create those solutions, experiment faster. Those are the functions where we look at people who have startup experience. They don't wear down because of that experimentation. It is usually found that they have more 0 to 1 inclination.
Can you mention some of those functions?
So I think, for example, our VP business is XOYO. We have people who joined us from Uber in terms of planning and analytics, right? In our tech, we have someone who was a freelancer and has worked with different size companies. So I think a guy who joined us from Mitsubishi and Bounce. So both experiences, a larger organization and a startup. So our product guy is startup, our VP business is startup, our demand head is startup, our finance is Big Four. Our procurement is Big Four.
Okay, final question, Pulkit. So tell us a little bit about your vision, right? Larger vision for Battery Smart. Maybe 5-10 years down the line. What do you foresee?
Sure. So I think we exist to enable EV adoption, right? To accelerate India's journey on that transition for electric vehicles. And we are trying to do everything possible for that. Battery swapping happens to be that large impact activity that could accelerate EV transition, but that does not stop us from doing other things that could also enable EV transition. Just to give you an example, what we are trying to do is work with folks like Zomato, with a lot of financing partners and OEMs, where someone who owns a ICE petrol bike today and wants to move to electric, the biggest challenge is access to finance, right, and access to income opportunity, right? So that is what we are trying to do, kind of be that platform. Customer can own a scooter without battery, that lowers the upfront cost. Even that cost could be financed through a financing partner, and they get ability to earn by working with Zomato. Their energy needs are being solved because we already have a swapping business, right? So but we're very focused on doing that so that the individual drivers or gig workers start becoming EV owners. Currently that's not happening at the pace that it could. Similarly, we also are trying to, on the other side of things, trying to help enable a energy storage solution, because we have 200 megawatt of batteries today, right? At some point of time they'll go out of life from the first use application, but all of them can be repurposed for storage business, right? So that kind of accelerates the renewable journey for our country, right? So I think that's another activity where we are very involved and testing it out. We're still 2 years away from, because we won't have batteries that are out of circulation. But India has 370 gigawatt hour plan by 2030 to be deployed in storage, right? First life batteries can't do it. We are yet to start production in India in terms of lithium ion cells. So I think players like us can really enable that.
What do you think the impact of that will be, of the lithium ion deposits? When do you think that will start impacting your business?
I think it would lower down the cost of batteries, but I think it's at least 7 to 8 years away. Even the cell production is a year, 2 years away just to begin, and once that begins, it would barely serve 30 to 40% of domestic requirement. So it will need to scale up. But we do not have refining capabilities yet. Mining, it would take its own sweet time. So I think it's 5 to 7 years away at least. But that being said, it is important that India actively works on both extraction, mining, and also cell production. We are at least 10 years behind China. They started doing gigawatt plants in 2016. Our first plant should be in 2025, so exactly 9 to 10 years behind.
Great. Thanks, Pulkit. This has been extremely insightful, and thank you for so generously giving your time.
No, thanks a lot for doing this.